She didn't walk into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom like someone facing criminal charges. She walked in like she was arriving at a gala. Victoria Sterling moved with the ease of a woman who had never waited in line, never been told. No, never been asked to explain herself to anyone who mattered. The tailored suit, the diamonds, the confidence of someone who believed the room would eventually bend to her will. To her, this wasn't a courtroom. It was an inconvenience on the way to lunch. And that's what made this moment dangerous. Because for most of her life, money had been a universal key, a solution, a shortcut. If a door didn't open, it wasn't locked. It just hadn't been paid enough yet. Parking tickets disappeared. Complaints faded. Problems learned their place. Victoria Sterling had mastered that system. She assumed today would be no different. What she didn't understand was that Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom doesn't run on influence. It runs on dignity. And dignity doesn't recognize bank accounts. You're probably wondering how a woman like this ended up here in the first place. Not for fraud, not for embezzlement, not for anything dramatic on paper. It started with something almost insultingly small, a parking space, a fire lane, a man in a security uniform who dared to say, "Ma'am, you can't do that." That was the moment the mask began to crack. Because this story isn't really about illegal parking. It's about how someone treats people they believe are beneath them. It's about what happens when entitlement meets a system that refuses to bow. And it's about the single sentence that would turn a routine hearing into one of Judge Caprio's most devastating lessons. So before we go any further, I want you to ask yourself something simple. If you truly believed everything had a price, what would happen the first time you were told no amount is enough? If you believe justice should never be for sale, stay with me. Because what happens next dismantles privilege piece by piece. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind of night designed to celebrate success and quietly reinforce hierarchy. The Providence Elite Business Awards were underway at the Marriott downtown. Inside, crystal glasses clinked. Names were exchanged like currency. Outside, beneath the glow of valet lights, another system was at work, one that didn't care about titles or net worth. It cared about safety, about rules, about lines you don't cross. Victoria Sterling arrived late, as she often did, in a pearl-white Maserati that purred like it expected obedience. Instead of following the clearly marked parking procedures, she pulled straight to the front entrance and left the car sitting squarely in a fire lane. Engine off, hazard lights flashing, confidence intact. To her, it wasn't reckless, it was efficient. Miguel Santos saw the violation immediately. He always did. 8 years working hotel security teaches you where disasters begin and where they're prevented. Miguel wasn't a man of privilege. He was a husband, a father of 3 earning a modest wage to keep his family afloat. Before that, he'd worn a Marine Corps uniform. He understood responsibility. He approached the Maserati calmly, professionally. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice steady. "You can't park here. This is a fire lane." Victoria turned slowly, as if offended by the interruption itself. Her eyes scanned Miguel's uniform not to understand him, but to categorize him. And once she had, her tone shifted. "Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" Miguel didn't flinch. "Ma'am, I understand you're attending the awards, but hotel policy requires all vehicles to use designated parking areas." That's when her patience evaporated. "My husband owns 3 buildings in this district," she snapped. "We donate more to this hotel's charity events than you'll earn in your entire career." Guests nearby slowed their steps. A few stopped entirely. Miguel felt heat rise to his face, but he didn't move. He'd been tested before, just not like this. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am," he said. "Fire safety regulations apply to everyone." Victoria laughed, not loudly, coldly. "Everyone," she said. "Rules are for people who can't afford alternatives." She stepped closer, invading his space, her expensive perfume sharp in the air. "If you don't walk away right now and forget this conversation, I will personally make sure you don't have this job tomorrow." That was the moment this stopped being about parking. Miguel's hands trembled, but his voice didn't. "Ma'am, I have children to feed. I can't ignore safety violations." "One call to your manager," she said. "One complaint about harassment. You'll be cleaning office buildings by next week." She expected fear, compliance, retreat. Instead, Miguel reached for his radio. "Unit 7 to dispatch," he said evenly. "Requesting police assistance for a fire lane violation at the Marriott main entrance." The response came back quickly. "Police en route. ETA 3 minutes." Victoria's expression changed. Not anger, disbelief. For the first time in her adult life, someone had refused to step aside. She hadn't just been challenged. She'd been exposed to a boundary money couldn't erase. and as flashing lights began to reflect off the polished surface of her Maserati Victoria Sterling, realized something she never expected to feel: uncertainty. By Thursday morning, the illusion of control Victoria Sterling relied on had already begun to fracture. Providence Municipal Court doesn't announce itself with grandeur. No chandeliers, no velvet ropes, just wooden benches, fluorescent lights, and the quiet authority of rules that apply whether you arrive in a Maserati or on foot. Still, Victoria entered as if the space would adjust to her presence. She wore a navy Armani suit tailored to perfection, calm, polished, unbothered. To her, this wasn't a reckoning, it was paperwork. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from the bench with his usual measured composure. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." "Good morning, Your Honor," Victoria replied smoothly. "I trust we can resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding efficiently. I have a charity board meeting at noon." The casual dismissal rippled through the courtroom. This wasn't just confidence. It was entitlement so ingrained she didn't hear herself saying it. Judge Caprio didn't react. He never did when someone tried to rush justice. "Mrs. Sterling," he said evenly, "you are charged with illegal parking, public disturbance, intimidation of a private security officer, and obstruction of justice involving a responding police officer. How do you plead?" Victoria smiled, the kind of smile meant to soothe donors and silence critics. "Your Honor, this situation has been dramatically exaggerated. I was attending a charity event that raised over $200,000 for children's hospitals. I was approached aggressively by hotel security, and unfortunately things were misinterpreted." She paused, then delivered what sounded like a rehearsed credential list. "My husband, Marcus Sterling, owns Sterling Technologies. We employ over 1,500 people in Rhode Island and contribute millions annually to the community. The idea that I would intentionally violate something as trivial as parking regulations is preposterous." Judge Caprio listened without interruption. Then he responded, "Mrs. Sterling, this case is not about your husband's company or your charitable activities. It's about your conduct toward Mr. Miguel Santos and Officer Jennifer Walsh." The smile tightened. "I spoke firmly," Victoria said. "When you're accustomed to competent service, inefficiency can be frustrating. If they perceived my tone as offensive, that's unfortunate." She didn't deny what she said. She dismissed how it felt. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward. Mr. Santos was enforcing fire safety regulations. Officer Walsh was performing her sworn duty. Neither created a problem. Victoria let out a short laugh. "Your Honor, this is a parking space. Surely the court has more serious matters to address." That sentence did something to the room. It wasn't just dismissive, it was revealing. "The law applies equally to everyone," Judge Caprio said, "regardless of wealth or status." That's when Victoria stopped pretending. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice sharpening. "Miguel Santos makes $12 an hour directing traffic. Officer Walsh writes tickets. I sit on 3 charity boards, and my husband's company contributes millions in tax revenue. The idea that their complaints should dictate my life is insulting." A murmur spread through the gallery. Miguel Santos stared straight ahead, hands folded. Officer Walsh remained motionless. Victoria pressed forward, sensing momentum. "Can't we handle this practically? Whatever compensation they believe is appropriate financially, and move on." The air changed. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mrs. Sterling," he said slowly, "are you suggesting that criminal charges be resolved through payment?" She blinked, genuinely confused by the tension. "Your Honor, I'm being realistic. Everything has a number. Tell me what makes this disappear." Silence swallowed the courtroom. In that moment, Victoria Sterling did more than insult working people. She crossed a line that money has never been able to erase. And Judge Frank Caprio stood up. When Judge Frank Caprio stood, the movement was slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. It wasn't anger that filled the room. It was finality. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice calm, but sharpened by decades on the bench and 38 years of serving this court. "I have seen arrogance in many forms. But rarely have I witnessed someone so openly express contempt for working people and for the justice system itself." Victoria shifted slightly, the first physical sign that control was slipping. "Your Honor, I believe my words are being misunderstood." "They are not," Judge Caprio interrupted, not loudly, but with authority that left no space for negotiation. "You believe money excuses behavior. You believe status replaces accountability. And you believe this courtroom operates the same way your social circles do." She opened her mouth again, but this time no sound came out. Judge Caprio gestured toward the gallery. Mr. Santos, would you please stand? Miguel rose slowly, his posture straight, hands at his sides. He didn't look at Victoria. He didn't need to. Mr. Santos, the judge said, how long have you worked in hotel security? 8 years, Your Honor. And before that, I served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps. Judge Caprio nodded. Thank you. You may be seated. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One person had spent his life enforcing rules to protect others. The other believed rules existed to be bypassed. Judge Caprio turned back to Victoria. You threatened this man's livelihood for doing his job. You attempted to intimidate a police officer. And moments ago, you offered to buy your way out of accountability. Victoria's voice returned, edged now with desperation. Your Honor, I support this community. My donations keep programs alive. Surely that counts for something. It does, Judge Caprio replied. It makes your conduct more troubling. Her eyes widened. More troubling. Yes, he said. Because generosity used as leverage isn't charity. It's control. The room was silent again. Even the air seemed to pause. Judge Caprio continued. This court does not exist to protect reputations. It exists to protect people. And today, the people you dismissed as insignificant are the very reason this system matters. Victoria's composure finally fractured. This is absurd, she said sharply. You're turning a parking violation into a public humiliation. No, Judge Caprio corrected her. You did that yourself. He reached for the case file. For illegal parking and public disturbance, I am imposing a $2,000 fine. Victoria barely reacted. For intimidation of Mr. Santos, an additional $5,000 fine. Still nothing. For threatening Officer Walsh and obstructing justice, $10,000. She shifted in her seat, annoyed but unafraid. Then Judge Caprio paused. And for attempting to corrupt judicial proceedings by offering payment in exchange for dismissal of charges. The pause stretched. An additional $25,000 fine. That got her attention. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Financial penalties alone do not correct moral failure, he said. And this court is not interested in symbolic consequences. Victoria shook her head slightly. What exactly are you suggesting? Judge Caprio met her eyes. 200 hours of community service. Her lips parted in disbelief. In service industries, he continued. Hotels, shelters, security operations. Places where people work long hours for little recognition. You will report to them. You will take instruction from supervisors. And you will learn what dignity looks like when it isn't wrapped in silk. Her voice cracked. You can't be serious. I am entirely serious. She stood abruptly. I graduated summa cum laude. I sit on major boards. I have obligations that support this city. Judge Caprio's response was quiet and devastating. Mrs. Sterling, education does not excuse contempt. Philanthropy does not erase cruelty. And privilege does not exempt anyone from humility. Victoria sat down slowly, stunned. This wasn't a fine she could write away. This wasn't a problem she could outsource. For the first time, she understood something essential. Money hadn't failed her. Her worldview had. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It went still. Victoria Sterling sat frozen, as if the air itself had turned against her. For the first time since she had entered that room, confident, adorned, untouchable, she understood that the ground beneath her feet was no longer negotiable. Judge Frank Caprio looked down at her not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. Disappointment. Mrs. Sterling, he said, you walked into this courtroom believing wealth grants authority over people. Today you learned it does not. She shook her head slowly, searching for leverage that no longer existed. Your Honor, she said, her voice strained, this punishment is excessive. This began as a parking misunderstanding. You're destroying my reputation over a minor incident. Judge Caprio didn't flinch. No, he replied. This began when you threatened a man's livelihood for doing his job. It escalated when you intimidated a police officer, and it culminated when you attempted to corrupt this court. He paused, letting each word land. You didn't misunderstand the law. You dismissed it. Victoria's voice rose desperate now. I give more to this community in a year than most people do in a lifetime. Doesn't that matter? It does, Judge Caprio answered. It means you had every opportunity to lead by example and chose the opposite. He straightened the papers in front of him. This court will not allow wealth to function as a weapon against working people, nor will it allow charity to become camouflage for cruelty. Victoria leaned forward, grasping at the last tool she'd ever known. Your Honor, she said quickly, I will donate $50,000, $100,000, any charity you choose. Let's turn this into something positive. The words echoed hollow. Judge Caprio looked at her steadily. Mrs. Sterling, justice is not a fundraiser. Her breath caught. Respect is not a transaction, he continued. And accountability cannot be purchased. He delivered the final order with measured clarity. Your fines stand. Your community service stands. And full video documentation of these proceedings will be sent to every charitable board on which you serve. Victoria's face drained of color. Charitable organizations. Judge Caprio said deserve transparency. Donors deserve to know who represents them. And the public deserves to know that dignity is not reserved for the wealthy. She whispered almost to herself, "You're ruining my life." Judge Caprio's reply was calm and unyielding. "No, Mrs. Sterling, I am protecting other people's lives from being ruined by unchecked privilege." He lowered his gavel. "This court is adjourned." For a moment, no one moved. Then the gallery stood not in celebration, but in affirmation. Miguel Santos remained seated, eyes forward, silent. Officer Walsh nodded once, composed as ever. Victoria Sterling stayed where she was, surrounded not by admirers, but by consequences. She had entered that courtroom believing everything had a price. She left knowing the most important things never would. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the lesson lingered. Victoria Sterling remained seated long after others stood and left. The diamonds were still there. The tailored suit still fit perfectly. But something essential had been stripped away, the illusion that status could shield her from consequence. Across the room, Miguel Santos gathered his belongings quietly. No celebration, no victory pose, just the steady movements of a man who had done his job and held his ground. As he passed the defendant's table, Victoria looked up at him for the first time without contempt. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, there were no titles, no wealth, no uniforms. Just two human beings standing on opposite sides of a choice that had already been made. Miguel nodded once, respectful, unprovocative. Then he walked out. That nod carried more weight than any fine. Judge Frank Caprio watched the room clear, his expression thoughtful. He had delivered punishment, yes, but more importantly, he had drawn a line. Not against wealth, not against success, but against the idea that dignity is optional when dealing with people who serve. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Headlines would follow. Boards would ask questions. Donations would be scrutinized. For the first time in her life, Victoria Sterling would not control the narrative. And that was the point. Because justice isn't about humiliation, it's about correction. Starting Monday morning at 6 a.m., Victoria Sterling would report to a downtown shelter. She would serve breakfast, clean tables, take instructions from supervisors who earned a fraction of what she spent on a single dress. Not as punishment meant to break her, but as education meant to rebuild something missing: humility. Judge Caprio didn't order anger. He ordered proximity. Proximity to people she had spent her life dismissing. Proximity to work that doesn't come with applause or gala invitations. Proximity to the truth that every job carries dignity, whether or not society assigns it prestige. That's the quiet power of this courtroom. It doesn't shout. It doesn't posture. It teaches. This story wasn't about a Maserati or a fire lane. It was about what happens when someone finally hears a word they've never accepted before. No. No, you can't threaten people for doing their jobs. No, you can't buy your way past accountability. No, you don't get to decide whose dignity matters. And for those watching, maybe from a living room, maybe from a place where you felt talked down to, dismissed, or ignored, this is why Judge Frank Caprio resonates. Because in his courtroom, everyone is seen. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you believe justice should never be for sale, hit the like button. And if you want more stories where accountability and compassion coexist, subscribe. Because real justice doesn't ask what you're worth. It asks who you are when no amount of money can answer for you.